Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a review. This is for Awaken Realms Lite. Brand new game coming to Essen called Flick of Faith. It is, as you can imagine, a dexterity game where you're representing one of the many gods in Greek mythology and then flicking discs to gain points.
Yeah, and you may be thinking, wait, Awaken Realms, there's no miniatures all over the place. This is a very different thing for them. Like Jeremy just said, it's Awaken Realms Lite. And I'm a huge fan of Crokinole, and this game definitely has a lot of that DNA going on because you're flicking these things all over, but it's a little bit more of an area control game.
First thing you're going to notice, you're going to have discs everywhere. All these discs have stickers associated with them. They're going to represent one of the many different gods. There are 4 colors in the game for 4 players. However, each of these gods that you have are double-sided, so you have the possibility of playing one of 8 different gods in the game. You're also going to have a neoprene mat. Yes, this is not a game board. It is a mat, so the thing flicks very well and will carry across if you flick it too hard, and won't go enough if you flick it too soft. It's also going to have 4 different islands on it with a navel in the center. Yes, I said navel. That's basically a volcano that is in the center of the board, plus a bunch of clouds, because each of the players is going to sit at one of the corners of each of these different clouded areas.
Yeah, and there's a few more components here to talk about. There's a few extra components over here, and you're going to be wondering what those are. Those are some of the unique powers that the gods have. As you see my card, I have Anubis on one side and Ra on the other. If I choose Ra, I'm going to get an extra yellow disc to use because all of these gods have very unique powers, and some of them have some very unique components. There's another one that has this hand that you can actually use to flick the discs instead of using your fingers.
So going back to the discs, there are various different discs that you're going to use. However, there's 2 main ones. There are prophets and then there are temples. Your prophets are the ones that you're going to be flicking from round to round onto the mat. And then your temples are ones that could be placed onto the board in various locations if you meet specific requirements. These are basically going to add to your area control, but also block other people's lines of sight within the game.
Yeah, and getting into the gameplay, each generation is going to consist of 3 phases. The first phase is the council phase, which brings into play these cards.
Yeah, so there's 20 different law cards, and this is what players are going to be voting for at the very beginning. You're going to draw 2 of these at random and stack them on top of each other. A thumbs up is going to represent the top card, and a thumbs down is going to represent the bottom card. These are going to have either persistent effects, meaning they could last for the entire game, or they could just enact for that particular round. So we have 2 of them here. For instance, the top card here, called the Red Sea, is going to last for the entire game, and is going to give the player with the most profits in the sea at the end of the round 3 victory points, which you normally don't score for. The bottom one here is fantastic. It's called Total Domination, and it simply says at the end of the round, if you have a profit on all 4 of the islands, you just win the game.
Yeah, and the council phase is really cool because like Jeremy said, you put these 2 cards out there and everyone puts their hand out, and on the count of 3, everyone either puts their thumb up for the top card or their thumb down for the bottom card, and then you move on to the next phase.
So the next phase is actually called the mission phase, and this is where the players are going to take shots with their profits. As we mentioned, the number of profits that you're going to have is going to depend upon the number of players playing. We have 4 players, so each player is going to start with 5 profits. The other 2 profits are simply going to be set off to the side because those could come into play with laws that could be voted into during the course of the game. On your turn, you're simply going to take one of your profits and put them anywhere on your side on any of the cloud locations. Now, there's many different objectives on what you're trying to do. One, depending upon the laws that could score you points, but the main thing you're trying to do is to flick these onto islands simply by using your finger and flicking it forward. Now, there's a couple things that can happen here. One is if you land on an island in one of these different circles that are on the island, you can remove that and then place one of your temples onto that particular location.
Yeah, and when you build one of those temples, you're actually able to put that anywhere on the island, including on top of that space that you went into. Now, if you also just flick and get into one of the islands, you're going to have presence there. And at the end of the round, you're going to get some points for having presence. You're going to get some points for having the most presence. And then finally, there's the navel.
Yeah, so the navel itself, if you're able to flick into the navel, you're allowed to remove this to gain 1 victory point, plus 1 additional victory point for every space where you have presence.
And it's important to remember, we've put these right in the center of these circles. They don't need to be there. You don't have to be that good. As long as your disc is touching that white circle on the islands or in the navel, that qualifies.
Now, one thing that can happen during the game, and will happen quite a bit, is you're going to be knocking other people's discs and their temples off of locations. If a temple is knocked off of an island, it simply is returned to that player. If a player's prophet is knocked off the board, it's thrown over here onto this tile, and that could be also important for various different hero powers and laws that get voted into.
Yeah, typically this pit just has the heroes there until the next round. But like Jeremy just said, there are some characters in particular who might actually score some points when their opponents are put in there. So it gives the players around the table some slightly different goals. I might get my points by getting presents. Someone else might get their points by trying to flick other players off the board.
And you're going to continue doing this until all of the players have played all of their prophets or flicked all of them onto the map. Once that is done, you're going to go into the next phase, which is called the worship phase. This is where you're collecting victory points at the end of the round. Now, there's a wide variety of ways to score victory points. However, it mainly revolves around presence in various areas. Of course, you're going to score any of the laws. And as you saw previously, we had the Red Sea, which is going to score for the player that has the most in the sea locations. However, you're also going to score all the islands.
Yeah, the islands are going to score for presence and domination. Presence is as long as you have one of your discs on the island, you're going to score a point for that island. So you could score up to 4 that way. Domination is where you're going to look at the area you control. Domination is going to look something like this. Right now, purple has 2 and green has 1. So purple is going to get 2 points awarded them for domination. That's not 2 points for their pieces, but just 2 points for the island for dominating it.
Once you score up all those points, all the prophets that are on the map are going to be returned back to their players. All the temples that are on the map will stay in those locations from round to round. Remember, you're going to play this for 3 rounds in a 3-player game, or 4 generations or rounds in a 2- and 4-player game. And the player with the most points is going to win at the end. So let's get into the review itself.
Yeah.
You go first.
Well, I'm going to start right off. I'll tell you right now, I don't have any significant negatives here. I would say the only thing is if you don't like dexterity games, this game might not be for you. But if you love games like Crokinole or anything where you're flicking things across the table like me, this game does a lot of things really, really well. Not to mention, it is absolutely gorgeous looking.
Yeah, I mean, all the things you just said. I like dexterity games. This distills all those things about more complex games into a single game, but also has some meat to the bones, especially with the laws, which are by and far my favorite thing about the game. These laws can dramatically change the way that you approach each of the individual rounds. There's some, as we said, that will only last a singular round. There's some that will last the entire game. So each time that you play the game is going to be vastly different, not only in the cards that come up, but the way that people vote those laws into play.
It's also really interesting with the gods and their various powers. There's just enough differences with some of them that as you play a game like this, when you're typically playing a dexterity game, you're really focused on doing exactly what you're needing to do to score points. But someone else might be able to score points in a slightly different way. So you might overlook the fact that you're getting more and more pieces in the pit. It's giving someone else more and more points.
And those gods are really cool. Like Zeus, for instance, the moment that he flicks into one of these areas, he doesn't have to place a temple into that area. He could place it over here, just according to his power. As we already mentioned, like Morrigan is one of those players that wants to flick people off the board, because if she can acquire 2 people that get flicked off the board, she gains 3 victory points. So again, there's a lot of variability in the way you're going to approach the game from the laws and the gods that you have. Also, the components. Let's talk about the components. You talked about the art, but the components here are really well done. This neoprene mat makes the game stand out. Like, this could have been done on a game board, and it wouldn't be the same.
Well, it wouldn't have worked very well.
It wouldn't have worked, and it also fits in this box. You just roll it up and put it right here. There's a place in the box for it. So it's really compatible. You can travel with this. Maybe. I don't know.
Yes, it is an interestingly shaped box. I love it. If you're one of those people who really like their shelves to look just so, Flick of Faith might have some interesting space on your shelf.
For cons, again, I don't know if I have any. I mean, this is a very interesting game. It's super fast. You can play this in 20 to 30 minutes with 4 players, probably less than that.
Yeah, and you're going to want to play again. Like I said, to mirror what you just said, if there is a con, it's that you don't like dexterity games, and that's really nothing against this game. It's just not your taste.
Well, the other great thing, too, is that the more players you have in the game, the more chaos that gets interjected as you start knocking things off. In a 2-player game, it's just, it's back and forth. But in a 4-player game, you could have things everywhere, and then one flick can knock everything off the board and just create utter chaos, which is great for this type of game.
Yeah, and if you think that you can't move these big temples, you're wrong, because you can. When I first played, I thought, okay, well, those aren't going to be movable, but you can flick these little prophets and actually make these temples move quite a bit.
Very approachable game. A lot of stuff going on called Flick of Faith. It's going to be at Essen from Awaken Realms Lite, a brand new brand for them. Yeah. If you have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us. Follow us on Twitter. Please subscribe to our channel and catch us next time.
Bye-bye.